If you like the story, think about subscribing for more similar material. The crash hit more difficult than he had anticipated. At one point, Logan was sitting at his diagnostic panel on Artemis VIII, the diplomatic escort ship, drinking artificial coffee. The next alarms, deafening silence followed by gut-wrenching metal, tears and blinding lights. He woke up half buried under twisted wreckage, gasping for air in a stifling quiet. He was fortunate that an emergency shield had placed him in a partial life support bubble, removed the fractured helmet and blinked as he surveyed the area in the glaring sunlight streaming through the shattered hull. He couldn't tell if it was a planet or a moon, but it was made of sharp rocks and dry wind. Nothing else, no smoke from neighboring pods, and a canyon extending to the horizon's searchlights, just the two of them. She was lying a few feet away, stretched out, and obviously Logan, hurt, staggered over to check her pulse. Her physique was enormous. Even collapsed on the ground, he was clearly 3 times his size. His blue skin shimmered. Her hair was tied, in thick black, and she was hardly visible beneath layers of carbon-dusted armor. He swept aside the coiled cables with the clinking metal rings. He rushed for the medkit, his fingers flying and cracking, scarcely breathing. Her right thigh suffered a rib tear and muscle tear, resulting in blood loss, but not yet death. Hoped that Velkar biology wouldn't reject the universal coagulant that was administered into her. She moaned as he quickly retreated, hands up, and her eyes snapped open wide. Violet was suspicious, and when she attempted to sit up, pain flashed through them. Logan hissed in a low, guttural voice. "Don't say that you're hurt. You'll tear it open," again, but remained motionless, saying, "Name Logan. Engineer Artemis sick. We crashed." "Do you remember how her eyes were like a dagger?" Focusing on him, Kavara Commander Velkar Honor. She fought to her elbow, winced, and said, "Good, you're not concussed." Crumbled. Once more, and I immediately applied a patch without touching anything. He opened his mouth. "You think I care about modesty, human?" She snorted, paused, and then shrugged. Fair enough. They sat for a while in silence. Wind Logan glanced up at the broken remnants of the spacecraft as it howled across the canyon. No backup systems were evident for the distress beacon, and the long-range antenna had been. He whispered, "We're stranded, and no signals are getting out." Kavara repeated. He agreed coldly. "Since you're not fit to travel any place, let's construct a shelter." Hours after Logan scavenged the crash site debris, Kavara grunted acceptance. He repurposed power cells, installed a tiny heat emitter, and used bits of hull to create a rudimentary windbreak against the rocks, began filtering air for a longer supply, and Kavara gazed silently. "You're not just a talking monkey," she remarked, narrowing but approvingly. "When he glad to impress," he said, having finished setting up the shelter. "Try not to bleeding on it," which prompted a rare snort that could have been interpreted as laughter, the first. The night was tense, so Kavara remained outdoors, claiming that the small shelter was too small for her. Logan protested, but eventually gave up. He laid there when she flashed her teeth, more as a warning than an actual attack. Trying to comprehend the problem while staring at the metal ceiling inside is not helping. No communication, no more than 2 days' worth of food supplies, and his only friend was at dawn, a huge extraterrestrial warrior who obviously didn't like him, went outside to see how she was doing. She was crouching in meditation, breathing slowly, and her armor was not on. Logan blinking cautiously next to her. Kavara was only wearing her underwear, remarkable long limb scars that resembled etchings on her skin, dense muscles, wiftly. "How? Is the leg healing? Did your medication help?" A little taken aback, but I enjoy fixing things, so she gave him another look this time. With less edge, Logan glanced out across the canyon with what we'll need to seek. Kavara gestured to the wreckage and said, "I'm an engineer, not a soldier." "You build," he exclaimed. "Great, the ideal team." Later that day, they created crude spears made of metal rods, with an energy cell powering the tip for shock impact. Kavara tested the first one on a rock lizard, and while it wasn't very pretty, it worked. After one whack, It stopped twitching. "I'll handle food," she said. Logan spotted her packing restlessly that night. "You okay?" "I'll be," she remarked curtly. "You've been wanting to talk about something." But he hesitated, sharper than ever. Her eyes sliced through him like glass. "My species has." She turned aside as the seasons changed, and I could feel the heat beginning. "Oh, it's not your responsibility, are you sure?" Logan's mind jumbled those words. "If you go into," he raised his hands and stated, "it's not your concern," in a quite hostile manner. Yes, they didn't talk for the remainder of the evening. Days went by, and Logan went on, expanding the energy grid and upgrading the shelter's water. Filtering Kavara seldom ventured too far while hunting and scouting, but her rage flared at the Logan stated that she once broke a metal plate when it fell out of her hand. He wasn't naive. He was aware that something might be developing inside of her, between them, but he was also aware that pressure quickly cooked things when they were alone, and they still functioned effectively. He would throw her tools in the middle, and she would catch them without noticing. Defended her from a fisherman's deadly gas explosion and protected his back during a wild animal ambush. Began to like her as someone attempting to keep herself together under something, not just as a combatant, challenging, and occasionally in silence she would observe him without suspicion. With one evening, Logan caught something more that he was unsure how to handle. She was breathing heavily while standing close to the shelter entrance, her hands clenched. "Are you okay?" She turned slowly, her eyes dimly shining in the darkness. "You should avoid me." He stayed inside Kavara tonight instead of moving her. There was something raw in her voice, but it wasn't furious or menacing. He nodded and moved back. She listened as she stepped outdoors, wondering what in the world this was becoming. The breeze brushed against the Logan had to adjust to the dry dust being dragged through the camp like sandpaper on the canyon bottom. To give the heater more electricity, he quadrupled the energy output on the electrical grid. Kavara sat a few meters away from him and shivered in her sleep the previous night. She didn't admit it, but he could see it. Distant Logan, still tense, arms folded, studying the horizon, leaning back and tapping a wire into position, shelter steady, heat solid water filters. "You've got skill," Kavara stated without looking. "Working not bad for a crash site." He gave him a rare praise. "Thanks." She continued scanning without responding. He stood wiping dust off his clothes, as if she had anticipated something crawling out of the gorge. "You've been silent." The heat sensation made her jaw tighten, yet he sat close to her, taking care to. "You've been agitatedly grabbing at shadows, but it's not getting better, or worse." He observed her for a while as she clenched her hands, second attempting to pick his words. "You mentioned that I should keep my distance, but it won't work if you pass out in the middle of. Perhaps I won't collapse anywhere, but I said I wouldn't. If you lost control." Her tone was sharply definitive, and he nodded, leaving it there till silence returned. Her eyes reflected the flickering firelight against her skin, giving the impression that she was made of stone. But on the about to burst, he inquired, "How long does this season last?" Kavara finally answered. Pondered. "For a week or longer, depending on what," he blinked. "Availability of what?" She looked to him at last. "Yes, buddy," he swallowed. The sooner it's resolved, the better." She didn't respond, but Logan shifted because the silence was sufficient. "You're right," she stood tall, "and I'm the only one in the area. I don't want to use you. Her silhouette is enormous against the stars over him. "Are not a remedy I'll put up with." "I didn't say you were going to," he said. She squinted and then averted her gaze. "As if you felt sorry for me, but I don't. I'm trying to figure out why Kavara looked at him for so long before turning and leaving." She returned the following morning, with 3 more skinned lizard-like creatures, and dumped them into the darkness. Logan took the line and began cooking close to the fire. Silence returned, although it felt heavier than normal today, and she sat closer than normal, with her arms resting on her knees. It's okay, Logan commented last night, without intending to be critical. This circumstance isn't great, Kavara nodded. We Velcare aren't designed for denial. Our natural mating cycles are quite painful if neglected. Unsure of what to say, Logan stirred the meat and asked, "Do you need something from me?" "No," she replied swiftly. "I will, you keep insisting that the only alternative is to die since it is." He glanced up abruptly. Kavara's voice was tense, but her face was serene. Internal systems can eventually be ruptured by prolonged heat without relief, nerve constriction, and mental dissonance. "And you weren't going to tell me that I didn't want to," Logan said in a fit of rage. "Terrify you?" He gave a little laugh. "You're 13 feet tall and armored." "You think I'm afraid of a conversation?" she said. "You should be softer this time." He gave her a piece of meat on a stick, which she ate silently while using a short mechanical motions. He said, "What would happen if someone did help?" Her chewing halted. Logan nodded. "Then the heat passes more quickly. Days instead of weeks." "What does that mean?" Assistance with the precise details of her head tilting slightly. "You already know, right? I mean, does it have to be?" She looked at him for a long time. "Physically, yes, and emotionally. Or is that optional? We are not like humans in that biological fulfillment does not require attachment. But do you sense it on her lips, squeezed together occasionally, correct?" He remained silent else for a bit. That evening, she stayed indoors instead of going outside, refuge while he worked on the backup communication system. When she moved, their shoulders touched, but neither of them moved. She broke the silence after a few minutes. "You're not what I anticipated from a man, I suppose. Weak, talkative, and terrified." She smirked, saying, "I'm full of surprises." I heard a faint sound from the communication system. Logan pressed the. She leaned over, consoled. "No good." "Nope." Her presence was weighty but not unwanted. "You are still serene." He looked at the screen over his shoulder, shrugged. "You're here, and I have a lot of faith that you won't eat me alive while I'm asleep." He looked directly into her eyes and whispered, "You're the one preventing wild beasts from tearing us apart." It seems like the wise choice, she observed him once more. "I don't want to lose myself, so I'm not hungry or cold. I keep my distance because I understand that if I get to the breaking point," Logan touched her arm, "but it won't be me anymore. Then we figure out a means to prevent you from reaching there." Her muscles tensed when he touched her, but she didn't resist. "You'd be putting yourself in danger already." "Kavara was still and moving slowly when I pulled you out of the wreckage. I want to try meditation again tomorrow," she added, nodding. "It helps with the..." She arched an eyebrow and asked, "You meditate?" "Not really, but I'll join the pressure. I'll pretend." That made her smile a little. That evening, she lay down, opposite him. Logan's breathing was erratic, yet they were closer than ever before. Uncertain whether she was calming down or just barely holding herself together, he lay awake listening to it. In any case, he was in. This wasn't because she required him, but rather because he didn't want to leave someone who was making such a concerted effort to lose control, and it's possible that this was about more than just survival. Logan woke up to find Kavara already outside, crouching close to her. Her breathing was steady and deliberate, as if she was attempting to center herself in the early sun by the fire pit, with her back to him. Cast shadows over her shoulders, and the heat she exuded caused steam to rise off her skin. He went outside and stretched. "You only get a few hours of sleep." He nodded after 2 minutes of meditation. "Any better?" She sounded worn out but not weak. Rather, she sounded like she was grinding. He threw her a hydration pouch through something, and she caught it without looking. "We should check the ridge again," he said. She said, "See if any wreckage got scattered farther," after having a drink. He said, "Good idea. Do you suppose any emergency beacons are still in place?" If Logan didn't dispute that. If someone had arrived by now, She very likely. After breakfast, they headed for the ridge with weapons draped over their backs. The journey was difficult, but they were accustomed to it. Kavara would now pause every few paces to survey the terrain before continuing. Logan observed her muscular, controlled movements, but it was evident from the way her hands flexed. She was losing control. Want to take a break? No. Are you certain you're... He let it go by the time they arrived at the ridge they had discovered. But I shook and cried, no. Nothing helpful. Logan sat on a rock and perspired, while Kavara remained upright. He murmured, "You need to cool down," as he scanned the skies tensely. "Yes, my body is adjusting because it appears to be." He stood and took a step, but she didn't respond, and instead just stared into space. "You've been pushing yourself for days, Kavara." Let me help her turn, slowly, to face him. When he spoke, her breath caught and her pupils widened. "I'm not scared of you." He just met her eyes without touching her. "Can't I try? If you don't realize how close I am to losing it, then let me keep Kavara. You can't try me without snapping." She shuddered, but not because of terror. Rather, her entire body felt like a wire that was about to break. She then looked aside. They went silently back to camp after she stated, "We need to go back. Now." She moved to the far side and crouched it, clutching her knees in an attempt to breathe. Logan didn't come over. After a few minutes, she called his name, and he gave her some room before gently approaching. "Yes," she spoke softly. "I need you to realize something. Continue. This is not about my body is requesting release, not romance, because of biology. Link, I understand instinctively." "No, you don't." She stood looming over him slowly, with each movement purposeful. "If I take you, I won't be kind, I won't be myself. Be quick, rude, and self-centered, and I'll utilize your voice." Logan remained composed. "So we don't." She looked at him and said, "Do anything until you're certain you won't lose control. I won't act as though I'm not drawn to you. I am, but I don't want that." He hesitated. Kavara moved away once more, breathing heavily, but not like this when you're in pain, making this more difficult. Good. If it was simple, it would indicate that neither of us was interested. That night, she said, "Bitter, you're impossible, and yet here I am." He and she didn't sleep, and he could always sense the tension between them when he closed his eyes. "When I was younger, I heard her speak in the middle of the night, and the air felt like static." Logan believed that mating was a weakness and a diversion from training. So he opened, "I saw my captain fall in love with a woman when he looked at her silhouette. Human." He sat up and stated it gave her something to fight for and made her stronger. Logan nodded and said, "I'm sorry she died, but she died protecting him." Kavara remarked, "Happy Xylon stretched. I don't want biology to govern me, but I also tell me what to do since I don't want to die from it." "You won't." He grinned as she glanced into his dimly lighting eyes. "Talk to me, keep me grounded, that I am capable of doing." So he did. He informed her about the oceans, rain, and city lights, on how he fixed malfunctioning drones in a junkyard for his first job. Detested flying. Ironically, she listened and asked questions periodically, but her respiration was slow. Slowly, he murmured, "You're calm. I am still hurting." "Yes, but less." Continued conversing until the stars went out. The following morning, Kavara was the first to. She continued, "I dreamed of your rain," with a faint but genuine grin. They worked. Logan laughed and said, "I hope it wasn't acid rain." "No, it was warm." Logan remained beside them as they strengthened the shelter, tightened the defense grid, and checked traps that day. Kavara moved more easily with more distance and didn't recoil from him. Consciousness. She gave him a tool at one point, and their fingers touched. She didn't draw away that evening after she sat next to him and asked, "Will you stop me if I lose myself again?" Yes, I will, even if I try to stop you. Nodding contentedly, she leaned out and touched his hand. Her skin felt warm. She stated with a purposeful touch, I don't need you, but I want you to meet Logan. She leaned into their foreheads and said, then wait until you're sure it's you making the choice, not your biology. They remained there, and she sighed. I like that, but you're stubborn. Two hearts beating rhythmically, silently, forehead to forehead, surrounded by dust, starlight, and a silence that seemed to be understanding rain appeared out of nowhere. The sky had been clear the previous evening, and it wasn't on any scanner. Now it poured in massive, thick layers, causing the canyon to be hammered and the dry dirt to become. While Kavara pulled the slick mud, Logan hurried to patch a leak in the shelter roof and cover the power cells. Has this planet ever heard of a weather warning? Logan yelled over the roof of the overhanging kitchen. Downpour Kavara took a moment to react, her eyes tense and her body taut. Squinting against the wind, she appeared uneasy due to more than simply the rain. After everything was, Kavara trailed, behind covered Logan as he dived into the shelter, trembling from the water. She shrank by half as soon as she entered, and water trickled from her wet hair and armor. Get those layers, she said. Off, he remarked. You'll freeze. She threw him a disapproving glance. It's not a good idea to sit around wet, Al. My people don't freeze easily. He went to the knobs and gave her room, but she hesitated. Turn on the heater, then gradually removed each piece of her outer armor, holding on to her underlayer. She sat with her eyes closed and her arms on her knees, her flesh drenched through. She nodded. You okay? Logan gave her a dry handkerchief. The rain triggers, something because of the heat, he was able to smell you more than anything else. Yes, your aroma is strong today. Dangerous, good or bad, he swallowed. They sat quietly while the shelter shook in the wind, but the water remained solid as the storm raged outside, tapped in irregular patterns against the roof, serving as a continual reminder of their solitude. Kavara's breathing had transformed, once more becoming slower and deeper. Logan tried to maintain control, but he could feel the thick air between them. I can't go, she said, her body nearly radiating heat instead of tension. Almost in a whisper, she replied, outside, the storm. Then we make this work together, Logan. I'll stop you if you lose control. He approached gradually until she clinched her jaw and said, I trust you. Their knees met. Haven't harmed me yet. He looked into her eyes. Your battling it all the time signifies something. She raised her hand and gazed at him, her chest rising with each breath, a little, then fell again. I know now that it's not just instinct. She recoiled as a hand touched her shoulder, but she didn't move away since her skin felt heated beneath. His fingertips made her body shake, but not out of fear, but rather because she was holding back. I can't stop wondering what would happen if we returned after she stated, if we're rescued. We're not there yet, but I still consider it, and she does too. Examined him once more. If I take you now, there's no turning back. He nodded. Perhaps moving on is your only choice. You talk too much, and you believe too much. A beat went by between them, and then she slowly leaned in, and her breath was cautious, as if every inch was a war, and their foreheads brushed again. I'm still holding on, she whispered, warming his flesh. You're doing great. Without moving, she reached up and softly wiped a drop of rain from her cheek. Tell me something, she muttered, her hands pressed tightly on her knees. Like, what? For a moment he thought. I used to be afraid of anything real. I believed that being busy would help me deal with my loneliness when I signed up for off-world engineering employment. But instead, she closed her eyes and made the silence louder. I realized that I don't feel no longer alone. She opened her eyes, and I did too. There was another lengthy pause in the air. Her body tightened again after her gaze shifted to his mouth and back to his eyes, as the temperature inside the shelter felt warmer and thicker. She moved slightly away, breathing heavily, saying, "I need to move. I need to. All right." He moved to the distant wall to give her space, and she paced the tiny. Jane crouched, stood, and squatted once again. He could clearly see that her heat was rising. She abruptly sat back against the metal wall with each muscle twitch. She glanced at his glowing eyes and said, "Can't do this much longer. Tell me what you need." Between hunger and self-control, touch helps me stay grounded, went gently in her direction, but she didn't stop him. He sat next to her and held her hand. He held it tenderly, running his thumb over her palm, and she trembled. Her eyes closed as her breathing slowed. "Is it better?" he asked. "Yes, then we continue in this manner." She tipped her head back. "You and I are different." The rain started to lessen outside, changing from pelting sheets to a steady. The only sounds coming from within were their breathing and the gentle hum of the Logan. The heater continued to hold her hand, without moving or yanking it away. She turned her head, glanced at him, and said, "Yes, if I ask, but not in this way. I want you to." She nodded slowly, then assisted me, making it plain that I wanted it to be us and not survival. I'll let them stay like that hand in hand for one more night. Hand enduring the storm in a variety of ways, and when she eventually inclined, her kavara rested her head on his shoulder, and he remained silent. Her head remained on Logan's shoulder as the early light crept through the shelter's gaps. He sat motionless, taking care not to move too much, while she breathed steadily and deeply. He didn't care that her arm had gone numb hours earlier. She remained anchored the entire time. No tantrums, no lack of self-control, simply warmth, stillness, and a peaceful sort of trust. After a while, her eyes opened and she whispered quietly, "Of course you're still here. You didn't sleep." She sat up and rubbed her face because she didn't want to miss anything crucial. He blinked and said, "You smell different today." "An improvement, or I'll take that as a compliment," he laughed. "Bad different, less like prey." Now that the storm had passed, she stood and stretched until her body nearly touched the ceiling. They ate rapidly, so I'll cook something up first before checking the traps. Logan didn't say much, and he wasn't sure if it was new or odd, but Kavara continued looking at him like she was trying to figure something out, but she always averted her gaze when he glanced at her. They hiked to the trap zone east of the shelter in the middle of the morning and caught 2 lizards. While Kavara stood watch, Logan packed the meat. "Your karma," he murmured last night. "You were tough and didn't give in, even though I nearly did." "I don't think I could have done it alone," he said, turning to face him. He stopped, then grinned. "You didn't have to." As they made their way back to camp, something changed between them. It wasn't romantic, but precisely, but less defensive and less tight than whatever wall had stood between them. At last, Kavara cleaned the meat that night, while Logan adjusted the solar charge panels. When they coordinated, they didn't have to talk much, and it was simple, small quips and observations. She even laughed once, but it wasn't a sarcastic huff. Logan looked up from the pool panel and said, "You have a good laugh, Kavara," raised an eyebrow. Perhaps Velcare warriors should laugh more often. They're mistaken. She thought about that and then glanced back at the fire. "You believe I'm becoming softer, but I believe you're becoming more open." Later, while the food was cooking, Logan didn't argue, but she also didn't respond. "Your heat," he remarked, sitting next to her a little closer than before. "How much, how long do you think you have?" "Maybe a day fewer. Can we survive without endangering you?" "I don't know." He steadily gazed at her. "Then allow me to ask." She flexed her jaw and said, "No, that's all. If we did this and I helped you, would it just be biology?" She gave him a long, searching look before saying, "I keep thinking about all that water cities stacked on cities people always inhabit," she added, chatting. "Maybe." But I'd like the lights. You'd hate the traffic, grinned and said. I believe Earth would enjoy you too when it moved over the idea of you as a towering warrior. This, I make an effort not to, as it Kavara slumped back against the shelter's wall, almost tempting death. Consider returning to my order to act as though nothing occurred here. You couldn't falsely saying no. She turned to face him and said in a hushed tone, when it touched you last night, it wasn't simply a gut feeling. It also helped me feel relaxed. His throat constricted, so perhaps we should quit acting like we're merely attempting to survive. When the air changed, her hand extended and rested on his chest, spreading her fingers. He didn't kiss her, and neither am I acting now. Not yet. But their closeness and the intense, unblinking manner she gazed at him spoke more than words. Logan froze when a faraway sound abruptly disturbed the silence. Engines heard Kavara leap to her feet, and they both scurried out over the ridge. Logan grabbed the scanner as he saw the metal glinting in the sky. Velcare verified the signal signature, but the train shuttle was not ours. No, another civilian. Perhaps Kavarin's eyes narrowed. Or scavengers. Logan waved a flare, producing a crimson streak as the ship circled low. The shuttle hesitated for a moment before rapidly descending, and Kavara intervened. Logan's weapon was lifted in front of him as the shuttle door opened, and 3 figures emerged armed but without a uniform he recognized. One of them waved. "Hey," the man said. Called, "Your crash beacon was picked up. Are you two okay?" Logan scowled and said, "We didn't turn on a beacon." Kavara kept her weapon raised. "What do you want the man to hold?" "We're merchants who saw the wreck from space and figured someone out." "Up empty hands, relax." Logan looked at Kavara, who didn't alter her posture, and it might have been true. Logan remarked cautiously. Perhaps she repeated what the traitor indicated behind him. "We've got food, medicine kits, and supplies. If you need transportation, let's chat." Kavara interrupted, dragged Logan away from him and back toward the shelter, saying, "This feels wrong too. Clean too easily. They may simply be kind individuals, or they may wish to salvage." Or Logan, one of the inmates, stroked the back of his neck. "There's no way off this rock if we'll be saved if they're genuine. But if not, they'll try something else," she said. Logan inhaled. "We keep an eye on them, and don't leave if they approach our equipment." Kavara gazed at him with pride in her eyes as we locked it down. "You're thinking like I'm just trying not to get shot, soldier." They cautiously made their way back to the traders. The strangers' excessive smiles and their hands hovering on guns. Even Kavara never took her eyes off Logan that night while offering assistance. They are lying about whatever she said, and I sat next to her in the shelter once again. She stared at him for a while, knowing that if they try anything, we'll deal with it together. After everything is over, I'm going to finally say what had been building all day. Not returning to the same version of myself either, and for the first time since the crash. She grinned, uncontrollably, and the traders reportedly stayed overnight. Logan knew better than to wait for weather clearance. Their shuttle was prepared for flight, and the sky was clearer. Kavara allowed them to remain, even though her eyes never left them, even though it had been days. A man named Reich, a woman named Sel, and a silent one were among them, called Cray Reich, who spoke too amiably and too quickly while grinning. They set up camp a few 100 feet away from the shelter, but it was close enough to observe everything. But once Logan sensed the tension, Kavara didn't calm down. The way her muscles remained taut, even while she sat motionless. "They're not just here for," Logan pretended to inspect the water purifier while uttering the words "charity" in a low voice. "They're waiting for something," Kavara said, trying to find a vulnerability. "Craig has a strapped blade on one of the 2 weapons I counted on each of their packs. They are armed smugglers behind his back, most likely trying to salvage the wreck or capture captives. You believe they are aware of your identity, although they may not be yet." Kavara stood. Logan remained inside and made a careful loop around their tiny perimeter. Despite her size, her steps were quiet. The energy cell was low, but the shelter was inspecting the weapon he had constructed. As the sun sank below, it would still have enough strength to drop someone for a little period of time. Hopefully, that was enough. With his hands in his pockets and a half grin, Ridge Reich strolled over to their camp. Kavara didn't respond, so Logan shrugged and said, "Do you mind if I sit?" Reich lowered himself onto a nearby rock. "It smells nice here. You two are once again consuming lizards." Logan stated in a neutral tone, "Better than starvation." Reich nodded and tossed, "You are aware of my team, and I have witnessed several collisions, but this one is unique." Clean shot through the strange Logan kept his face unreadable, and there were no engines, distress calls, or escape pods found. When you're under fire, things move quickly, so I assume Reich's eyes flicked to Logan. Either your girlfriend or your bodyguard didn't respond to Kavara. Reich rose up slowly and lifted his hand, saying, "Hey, just making." "Then leave," she replied bluntly, and Reich stood grinning casually. "Didn't mean to go too far. We're going before dawn, so please let us know if you two decide not to accompany us." Without waiting for a response, Logan left into the darkness and waited until the man, yes, he was testing us out of earshot, and I believe he now suspects who I am. Logan leaned forward. "If they believe I'm valuable, how much danger are we in?" Instead of sitting across the shelter that night, Kavara sat shoulder to shoulder with him, vigilant, yet composed. "I won't abandon you," she whispered, unable to accompany them. She glanced at him. "You would stay here and risk dying with me, even though you believe I haven't already made that decision." Her body's tightness eased for a brief period before she spoke again, this time more quietly. "I feel like it's becoming hotter. That means you're safe, right? It indicates that I'm at last able to think clearly about you and what this is." Logan gasped, "And I'm not sure what it is yet, but it's not nothing." She looked away and nodded slowly. "If we make it through tomorrow, I'll have to make a choice regarding my future destination. What I am doing outside of this location, you are not need to." She briefly put her hand on his, and I'm relieved that she was able to figure that out on her own. The morning arrived quickly, and Kavara was the first to wake up and get dressed while Logan ate. Swiftly and thoroughly inspected their gear. The smugglers pretended to be getting ready for their shuttle, but they hadn't. Reich packed up camp and looked over many times. "They're stalling," Logan remarked. Kavara glanced toward the debris and said, "They want us to make the first move. Tell them we discovered a hidden power core bait there, and when they follow, we divide them up, take one of each, neutralize, and don't kill until absolutely necessary." Logan, are you certain about this? They came up to Reich in the middle of the morning. "We discovered something large while excavating near the wreck and waved a metal fragment in the air." Reich's eyes brightened, suggesting that it would be worth a look. "Core. We didn't touch it because we thought you wanted a first look." He looked at Logan, Ledsell, and Reich as Kavara demonstrated to us how quickly they moved. Logan took them, but Cray stayed behind, saying she wanted a moment to recover. To the location he and Kavara had already selected, a ditch close to a panel that had fallen. Just Logan responded, "There," pointing to Reich, deep enough to make anyone who stepped into it focus their attention downward. Leaning forward, "I'll be damned. The cell crouching next to him appears clean." Logan waited 3 seconds for something of value. Kavara materialized behind her like a phantom and struck Cell in the back of the neck with the hilt of her blade as she stood. Reich collapsed silently, and Logan attacked him after spinning his hand to his belt. Reich struck the ground hard before he could draw, and Logan received a blind punch. Reich coughed, moaned, and fell limp as the blow slid and jammed the edge of his elbow into his throat. He was breathing heavily. Logan stood, and everything went more smoothly than I had anticipated. Kavara checked. Unconscious, Cray is restrained, and their shuttle has been turned off. Logan cleaned himself up and said, "What now?" "We leave them here with ample food. They will live, and we will too." She looked into his eyes, and we took Logan, and Kavara stopped together on the shuttle, and Kavara glanced at him. "Yes, if you..." I still wish he hadn't hesitated, but she approached slowly and steadily. He nodded, and then let's leave. More instinct, no more heat, simply decision. He realized it wasn't survival anymore when she gave him a slow, genuine kiss. Something more. Krayreich and Sel were safely tied, and the shuttle took off without any opposition. Kavara was left in their own camp with a beacon ration and their egos damaged. Logan kept his hands firmly on the controls and maneuvered the ship without, turning around. The shuttle was old, but it was still exciting to watch the instruments rise into the atmosphere. Flew smoothly. There was a slight creak in the frame, but Logan's engines kept firm. The idea was straightforward. They changed their direction to face the closest communication relay satellite. Use your credentials to send out a distress alert and wait for official retrieval. However, nothing felt straightforward anymore. Kavara sat next to him, eyes front, arms crossed. Logan didn't push, so she hadn't said anything since they were hauled up, but he could sense the weight of her silence. Something was alternating between them, weighted with meaning, but not broken, or unsure ultimately broke it. "The signal strength is good, and we should arrive at the relay in 2 hours." She nodded. "When we are within range, the Velcor patrols should communicate my ID code." Logan picked it up and looked at her. "Are you certain you want to return to them?" I asked Kavara, but she didn't respond soon away. "It's my responsibility." Turned her head. "Then perhaps it's time." "No, that's not what I want, but I've been trained for it since I could walk. To decide for yourself." She researched him. "You make it seem simple, but it's not yours." To make Logan check the power while the ship sailed quietly for a while. Levels. Change the auto-stabilization and life support settings. And Kavara observed the stars beyond the glass, her face inscrutable. "I've never been in a relationship." She added. He looked over after the heat. "Is that a warning?" "No. It's an admission. I've never been stuck with a 13-foot warrior before, so I guess we're both in new situations." He reclined back in the pilot's seat. Area Kavara gave a small smile. "You always manage to make things seem less frightening. I can handle pressure, but anything after that terrifies me." Raising an eyebrow, I explained that I understand how to survive, adapt, and maintain composure. While when things calm down and everything goes wrong, that's when I begin. Logan held her stare when she said, "You think you'll second-guess this?" "No, I consider the implications. What will happen next?" She leaned forward a little, voice softly. "What would you like to do next?" He paused. "I want to see where this applies to both of us, not simply because we get by together, because you are important to..." "I'm not as strong as you are," she said, glancing at him as if to. "That's perilous," he said, "as is flying into uncharted terrain. But you..." She laughed dryly and said, "You really don't know how to back off." They arrived at the relay. "Do you?" "No, not when something's worth fighting for." Shortly after sending her ID, Kavara received a direct and concise response. A Velkar patrol was on their way right away. "They'll be here in an hour," she added. Logan folded his arms and said, "They'll expect a debrief. They'll expect me to return." "What would happen if you said no?" "I might be banished and losing my position." "Would that be..." "I've worn this armor for 10 years, she said, gazing at the serene screen. "I've battled for my people for years. Without that, I wouldn't know who I am." Kavara didn't flinch away as he extended his hand to cover hers. "You're still you, armor or not. They'll have to get through if they try to bring me back, even if I declare I'm leaving. I made up for the fact that you're not even 6 feet tall by looking down at him. I can't ask you to fight them," she said with a quick, piercing laugh, demonstrating her reckless optimism. "You didn't," I offered, she murmured. Their fingers remained interlocked while The spacecraft floated in orbit as the stars moved about them, waiting for Kavara remarked, "I used to think that kind of action defined me, and now I think who I am." Kavara had slain guys like Reich for less. Protected means more than who I beat. He gave her a single squeeze, so perhaps, when the Velkar ship arrives, it's time to safeguard your future rather than merely your past. When it arrived, it docked with the shuttle without incident. A polite greeting was sent over the communication system, and two officials on board, tall like Kavara, wearing ceremonial black. The female commander was pale marked. "Commander Kavara," she murmured across her neck. "We got your signal." We were Kavara, stood at full height saying, "I survived, and I am no longer a commander." The cop blinked and said, "I apologize, but I resigned from my position. That is not possible." The officer's gaze shifted to Logan, who is a human being. "I've made my decision. Kavara didn't flinch because of me rather than because of anything else. Indicates that I do silent stretching." The officer turned and looked at her. Companion then turned around and said, "We'll submit your resignation, but we know this won't be reversed. It wasn't intended to be that way." They departed without protest, just like the Velkar ship. "You sure?" Logan asked, pulling away and staring out the windshield. "No," she said, "but I want to be." He turned to face her and asked, "So what now?" She gave him a small smile. "Little, we now discover what life is like. They leap into hyperspace, not two. The stars merged into streaks together, but not from Earth to Velcro space, somewhere new." For the first time in days, Logan felt the strain in his chest release as the shuttle launched into hyperspace. Wreckage, no smugglers prowling their camp, no titles or deadlines. Only the buzz of the motor and the immense unknown ahead loomed over Kavara's head. He looked at Kavara, who was sitting quietly with her long body slightly coiled. She glanced straight ahead to make room for the co-pilot's seat, but her thoughts were elsewhere, and he could tell by the way "You regret it?" he questioned, tapping his fingers slowly against the armrest. Did not immediately respond. "Walking, away from your command, I mean." I believed she may have finally spoken, but I don't know. Logan nodded. "Good, but I am unsure about me." "No," she said a little more quickly than he anticipated regarding what would happen. He reclined in the pilot's chair next to me, and the hum of hyperspace wasn't actually a sound, but it was more like a slight tremor in his bones. Logan mentioned a station on the border of neutral territory called Saren's Gate, which is usually a little unnerving. It's a largely independent trading hub that's a good spot to vanish if we want to. She cocked her head. "You've been there before. The food was awful, but the accommodations were inexpensive, and I prefer silence over comfort." They also flew in silence. Logan changed their direction after observing data slide across the dashboard for a moment. Kavara hadn't spoken again, but she had shifted slightly to avoid a busy shipping passage. Beside him, her presence was firm. She was breathing steadily and no longer fidgeting. He finally said, "You want to talk?" as though she was preparing for the next move. "About it." She asked him, "What?" Kavara's mouth moved a little. "How about us? I don't want to think that we're something we're not. You believe our experiences are meaningless." "No," he said, "you want to be clear because I believe it represents something significant." She nodded slowly. "Mean more to me than anybody has in a long time." Logan's heart skipped a beat. He grinned and said, "Good news, but I don't know how to do this." She eventually smiled a little at that. "We can learn together," he remarked. "At our speed," she said. "I've only ever heard battle orders govern every component of my life was disciplined, but this thing between us is uncontrollable. I can't prepare ahead or fight for it." Exactly as Logan stated, Kavara turned to face him, her gaze steady. Then we tried, and while they hadn't touched yet, the weight of her consent filled. Logan spent several hours in the cabin with whirring devices and air that was warmer than recycled. Demonstrated to her how to access the station's registry logs, and she showed him how to turn off a tracking beacon that was buried. It turns out that the smugglers had one hidden in the hull, which they destroyed simultaneously, cautious and effective. When the station eventually came into view, a huge wheel-shaped object hovering over a gas giant gave Logan a weird feeling. He tapped the serene Sarin's gate with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. "This is Shuttle Deltapore Identifier asking for docking access." A gruff voice entered the Logan, delivered a fake transponder with a static copy of the Delta Transmit ID code, just enough to ensure they weren't reported as stolen, nothing unlawful. However, the voice said, "Docking Bay 16, welcome," even if officially the ID was accepted. Logan looked at Kavara as they stopped at Sarin's gate, thinking, "This place might get hard, stay close, Logan." He looked at him. "I've been in combat zones," smiled. "Even so, I'd rather not lose you." They left after 5 minutes of freedom. The shuttle together. The darkly illuminated docking room was filled with fuel tanks, packages, and Logan led a repair staff into the side corridor, avoiding the main one without giving them a second glance. Concourse. The station was largely unchanged, with pipes leaking steam and flickering lights, and there was an unpleasant odor of cooked synthetic beef and machine oil in the air. Noisy and packed, but they managed to get a room above a food stand in the more subdued area, with 2 beds, a window, and a flickering overhead light. But Kavara sighed as she let go of her suitcase and sat on what seemed like their first genuine home since the crash. Logan chuckled at the edge of the bigger bed. "This is freedom. Technically speaking, it's smaller than I thought." "Well, so am I." She looked up, but I didn't say. That was an issue, and his smile grew softer. "Now we eat," she added, "and then we rest." Logan agreed. "I like the sound of that." Then we decided where to go. They ate in quiet at a food stand where a mechanized seller offered hot metal bowls of seasoned noodles, which Kavara ate with. Despite making a frown halfway through, she demonstrated efficiency. "This tastes like A's customary." Rubber Logan grinned as they slowly went back. People stared at Kavara as she towered above them, not touching yet aware of every step. Logan was strangely proud of how natural it felt in front of the throng, but nobody approached him to stroll alongside her in this manner. Kavara sat at the window of the apartment, observing Logan sat next to her as the never-ending clouds swirled around the gas giant below. "You regret coming with me?" he questioned, and she shook her head. "No, I'm not. I don't regret it, but I'm still afraid of what it means." He leaned back and said, "That's enough for me." They didn't say good. When they eventually set up separate beds for the time being, it wasn't distance. Rather, it was peace that they had truly earned. Tranquility, and Logan slept with one eye closed for the first time since the collision. Kavara said in a whisper in the dark, "Thank you." He simply grinned without responding. Already imagining what the future might hold, the morning at Sarin's gate was an odd idea. There was only a change in artificial lighting, not the actual sun rising. The station ran on cycles, changing from dingy, yellow to pristine white. Although time felt, Logan loved the loose stretch after all the chaos and woke up gradually. Listened to Kavara's steady breathing while blinking at the ceiling. She was still asleep, curled up on her side in the... Even though she was sleeping, she appeared attentive, with rigid posture, as if her body hadn't. He sat up and stretched after learning how to completely relax, but his muscles were still hurting. From it was a pleasant kind of pain after days of hiking, building, and avoiding trouble. He moved silently, the kind that reminded him he had overcome adversity, to the tiny lavatory and sprayed his face with cold, stinging water, drying scratchy cloth, and gazed at his reflection, thinking, this was his life now. No commands, no employment agreement, no set route, just him and her. He turned. Kavara sat up and ran a hand through her hair as soon as he heard the bed creak. His eyes met his as always, intensely, without hesitation. "You slept?" he said slightly. "This bed is barely functional." Better than dirt and metal, she retorted. Despite her grunt, she stood and stretched, and Logan heard her joints pop softly, himself observing the movement of her shoulders and the curvature of her spine. She saw him, staring but remained silent. Logan donned a simple shirt and cargo pants that he had recently purchased from Kavara, a station seller, covered her armor with a dark travel cloak. He inquired, "Duty?" She looked ready for war breakfast. She nodded, and they went back to the food. Vendors. Logan ordered flat, and the same monotone pitch that the previous night's droid had used to greet them. Kavara simply indicated the cakes and a hot beverage that appeared to be coffee, largest item on the menu. They dined in a peaceful nook while the crowd went past. People, aliens, traders, smugglers, the hum of business and casual chatter. "You still want to stay?" he said, creating a wall of sound that almost made them invisible. "Have you been here long enough to decide what to do next?" she inquired in between mouthful. "We could reach any outer sector with the fuel and credit sticks we took from the smugglers. Outer sectors are dangerous." She looked sideways and said, "You're not up for rough." I didn't mention that they... After eating, Logan went to the markets, picked up repair tools and spare parts, while Kavara picked up a short blade. There were no words to describe the unremarkable wrist scanner, but they both knew what gear meant. Preparation. Logan noticed something strange as they neared the central plaza. One was human, the other tall and shrouded, and the figures stood motionless while the crowd moved about them. As he watched, Kavara noticed, and she moved slightly, positioning herself between Logan and the watchers. She muttered, "They've been following us since the noodle stand." No, the smugglers' friends behave like hunters. Bounty Logan nodded toward an alley between vendor stalls, suggesting that he might not have panicked. 3 right bends lead to an access tunnel close to the rear wall. Although Kavara didn't question, she immediately followed him, and they sliced through the crowd. Logan guided her past a quieter, darker alley while moving quickly and casually. Rusty maintenance drone then entered the tunnel and sealed it off. "Won't hold them long," he said, turning on his wrist light and closing the door behind them. After drawing the short blade, Kavara remarked, "Then we don't give them the chance." They proceeded farther into the narrow passageways and low ceilings of the service tunnels. Kavara cramped, but she remained composed as they passed shimmering coolant pipes. The signs and lights had not been changed in years. "Why now?" Logan mumbled. "Why do you follow us?" "They're not." He halted, saying, "You resigned." "They're following me," she added. "You forgot about that. And I continue to be a menace and a symbol to my adversaries. They're either lucky, or they leaked your location." A dull thud reverberated down the passageway. "Close," she muttered. Logan looked over the walls and found 2 maintenance hatches. "If we climb." "No time." She took hold of his arm and dragged him behind a stack of crates, and squatting low, Logan heard deliberate, precise footsteps. They waited, one set heavy, one light. A man with pale skin emerged first. As his gaze swept the hallway, he noticed skin and mechanical implants flowing down his neck. The second came in shorter. Kavara moved like lightning as they passed the boxes, faster with a stunner. She yanked the tall man back, slammed his head against the wall, and put her arm around. His throat dropped silently, and Logan rushed him the moment he turned. The shocker Logan seized the man's wrist, twisted it, and drove his knee after firing once missing. Kavara trapped him with the blade at his neck as the weapon fell into his side. "Who sent?" The man coughed. "Where freelance tip came through the darknet," she demanded. "Big payment for a Valkyrie warrior on the run who posted their word untraceable. No name." Kavara glanced at Logan. "He's speaking the truth." What did Logan ask now? She looked down at the trembling guy. "Leave Saren's gate under her weight, and I won't be as forgiving if I see you again." The man gave a desperate nod, and they released him back in the Logan paced the room as Kavara sat quietly on the bed. "They quickly located us. Going to continue, isn't it? He probably quit, so let's stop." Kavara looked up while she was running. "You previously stated that you were unsure about your identity. Without your order, Therefore, instead of hiding, let's start something new. Together, they should build a life. She approached him and put her hand on his cheek. Even today, you still desire that, and I want everything. You risk the future, whatever. She seemed to have given him a slow, steady kiss, and as they parted ways, she muttered, "Then we build together." Logan didn't feel like a survivor for the first time since they met. Instead, he felt like Logan was in front of the vendor stall, starting something genuine. Gazing down at the list of property units on the datapad, the most were expensive rubbish old shipping containers, welded into little rentals, although some of them had good electrical connections and clean systems. Additionally, private docking level Cs received some reinforcement. The merchant said that the airlocks had a good view of the outer ring and were quiet and not inexpensive. However, nobody questions there, so I'll accept what Logan stated without Logan said. "You don't want to see the rest," as the merchant hesitated and blinked. He took the key code and moved the credits, so that one's good. A few minutes later, he was standing outside a large press-sealed door with Kavara at his side, and the place was as quiet as ever. Wasn't opulent. It had a single main room with a reinforced sleeping section in the back. Kavara passed through walls and a little command panel, but it was theirs, examining steadily with no exposed systems and a high ceiling. "Believe you can live here?" she asked. Him, "Yes." Logan nodded and they said, "Then we're home." Unloaded what little they had, Kavara kept her blade clean and safe above the entrance, and Logan rebuilt a desk from junk, installed a tiny workbench and wired a communication line. Kavara prepared their first dinner with diagnostic software ready, in his corner of the globe. She said the off-world root stew was inspired by combat rations, although it tasted. They sat cross-legged on the floor, and it was better than anything Logan had eaten in weeks. Steam rising between bowls in hand. "You think anyone will come for us?" Kavara shook her head in response to Logan's question. "We're out of the way by the time if the bounty reaches this level, it will be outdated, and if not," she tapped the handle of. He grinned and said, "Right." They remained in the station for weeks. Frequently, they worked together, picking up jobs here and there. Logan, while Kavara offered her services as a private guard, she fixed malfunctioning equipment and communication towers for the neighborhood merchants. Quiet, efficient, and well-respected station officers who earned enough money to eat adequately. They kept things simple, never taking more than they needed to survive. The nights were spent in their house, occasionally conversing, occasionally remaining silent, and occasionally wrapped in. Logan learned to read her emotions from the way her fingers twitched when they were together, as if the battle outside had never occurred. The rare and cherished sound of her laughter annoyed her, as did the way she cocked her head when something caught her attention. Kavara also discovered his patterns, which included talking to himself to address difficulties. The expression in his eyes just before he kissed her, the way he tapped his thumb across metal as he was thinking. Despite the fact that life became routine, Logan stood at the window. One morning with a Kavara joined him, sipping a mug of synth coffee while observing the gas giant swirling below. Still wearing a basic black shirt, with loose hair and clear eyes. She inquired, "You still think about the crash?" He occasionally responded, "But not the..." He looked at the worst portions, the way everything altered, and you regret anything. He put his hand over her, but she didn't lean into him for a single second. "Yes, you are correct. We have been fortunate. We earned that luck issues." They spent some time sitting together without any pressing missions or imminent threat. That afternoon, the soft beat of tranquility and the quiet hum of the station. Logan purchased a modified transmitter core and several other items when they went to the market. Kavara looked through the weapon stands, but didn't purchase any heat regulators. However, Logan saw that she was staring at a little knife with a bone-carved handle, so he got it for her. He handed it to her back in the room without saying anything, and she turned it over in her "thought it might suit you," he remarked. Hand silent, "I love it," she answered. Didn't express gratitude to him verbally. Instead, she gave him a slow, purposeful kiss, as though she having no other place to spend the remainder of her life. That evening, they lay side by side and gazed at the stars through the panorama. There are no conflicts or storms, only calm, steady breathing and the comfort of. She said, "I never told you what I thought when I first saw you in the wreckage, as someone who had stayed when it counted." Gently. "I assume it was a flattering smile because I assumed he was too small to survive this. He juggled, and I am grateful. But you pulled me out and disregarded my commands. Logan glanced at her when I was losing myself, but you kept me human by suturing my wounds. Maintain your humanity. You were already human. You simply didn't want to acknowledge it." She nodded, slowly. "And even when I threatened to take you, you didn't bat an eye." She rolled her eyes, knowing that beneath all of that frowning, there was something positive. "You're not extremely intelligent at times, but I'm tenacious." They chuckled softly. "Would you ever want to go?" He requested that everything be Velcroized from space to Earth. He stretched for her hand and held it not long after she responded, "This is better." "You ever ponder whether or not individuals like us were destined to meet?" "No," she spoke the words. "But I know we were meant to stay." They became as solid as a rock, them more deeply than any planet could. Time went by in the universe as usual. It continued to spin wildly and chaotically, but for Logan and Kavara, it eventually slowed, not because the threat vanished, but since they confronted it together, that was.